Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here are your hosts, Joe Kuzma and Brian E. Roach.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. The boys are back in town. I am Joe Kuzma and rejoined with my brother from another mother, A1, Brian E. Roach. Brian, what's going on?
Well, I went to Vegas, and I didn't get to jump off the hotel.
Yeah, man. Boy, this COVID stuff is really getting on my nerves if it's not on yours already. You went on Vegas, didn't get to jump off the hotel. We actually headed out to South Carolina and Myrtle Beach, and they had my wife had booked a show, and they canceled it like on Tuesday for Thursday. So they extended like whatever things were going on by governor or whatever. I don't know, whoever, what's its name. But anyways, my kid did get to play in the ocean and on the beach. So that was a positive. But yeah, it was sad, man. But you got to go do a lot of your outdoorsy hiking, whatever it is. We're going to be searching for your body one of these days. I'm always worried when I see your social media posts.
Well, I did get to go to Zion National Park, and I got to climb on some rocks and go up some mountains and do some stuff and look over 800-foot drop-off cliffs. And that was very fun. And I met some desert longhorn sheep and wondered if they were going to butt heads with me, but they chose to ignore me. And that was fun too. And I hung out with my brother and my dad for a little bit. I guess I also ran 6 miles in 100-degree temperatures.
Yeah, that's not necessarily the smartest thing to do. I did that last year around this time too, but it was for a physical fitness test, and the hottest day of the entire year in the area that I was in, and on a track with the artificial turf as well. And that thing it soaks heat, and it was brutal, man. But
yeah, I didn't have the artificial track. I just did it in downtown Las Vegas, and let me just tell you, I'm used to running at a park, right? That is, a little community park. It has a half-mile track, so I know how far I'm going and all that stuff. But the thing I really noticed is it doesn't smell the same.
Well, that'll get you too, man. When you're sucking air, and then there's like just the smells that emanate, and there's very much there's certain things like I hear or smell, believe it or not, that reminds me of football. In football weather. It sounds very strange, but it's like if there's a certain type of barbecuing that's going on, it reminds me of tailgating, or hearing believe it or not, myself and my wife, we've been doing a lot of vinyl collecting, getting records, and AC/DC Back in Black was just on sale, and I just picked that up. So, when I hear Thunderstruck, that's like one of the songs that they like to play in the pregame warm-ups or the introductions or whatever. A lot of people associate Styx and Renegade with Steelers, but believe it or not, Thunderstruck is pretty close with me. And so's Ram Jam, Black Betty, which they play a lot at the games too.
Mm-hmm.
But I've used the Shazam thing for years and compiled probably about 70 or 80 songs that have been played at Heinz Field, which is really great for a playlist. And if anyone's interested in that, maybe I'll put that together and put it out on. I might do that for the website, because now. We were going to talk more COVID stuff, but I think we're still going to we're going to table that for maybe another show or two, because there's just still more information coming out. The guys were like, hashtag we want to play, asterisk, not the preseason. And it's just, we got to figure out what the heck's going on. You got New York that's not going to have any fans now, so no fans for the opener. We're not going to be able to go out and go see that game like we were planning on. And, in New Jersey, I should say, but New York Giants, New York Jets, they're not going to have any fans. We already mentioned the Eagles before. So there's much more pertinent stuff that's been out there on social media we need to talk about, because Antonio Brown is back in news. But before I get to him, I do have to mention, I got back to Oscar's, the Pittsburgh bar that's over there, bar and restaurant, whatever you want to call it, in South Carolina, in Myrtle Beach. I got back there. It's been, 15 years since I had been there, and I must say, excellent wings. So if anybody goes there, you'll feel right at home with your Steelers gear. And I had plenty of Steelers Nation come up to me all week because, I've got everything from the swim trunks to the flip-flops, the beach towel. I met quite a few really cool people. There was an older gentleman that was from the Pittsburgh area too, and he had some good stories about some people he worked with that did security for the Steelers and some training camp stories. And it was funny because we were just talking about AB, and the prima donna thing came out, and I told the story that I always tell about what he did with my cousin's nephew and put him on his lap and did the selfie and signed his shirt and all that other stuff. And that was the year he went crazy. He went crazy 4 months later, Well, he's crazy again. He's back in the news. What? He retired and then unretired. Now, the guy can't make up his mind. He said that he was done. And then, as predicted, as most of us thought, 2 days later, he's asking the NFL to wrap up this probe so maybe he could get signed by another team. And it's just man, so that prompted just another clown that's in the Pittsburgh media, Andrew Fillipponi, who started talking about, he brought this to the forefront, so you got everybody else talking about it, so why not us, right? This seems to be the hot topic right now is Heinz Ward versus Antonio Brown. And who was better by whatever metrics, whatever categories that you want to label it or put them in. And we've got a handful of them here to talk about today because we're somewhat prepared here. It's interesting because people are they talk in the breath of Heinz Ward being one of the best Steelers wide receivers ever, and Antonio Brown certainly could have been had he hung on here for another year or two. I think bar none, he would have owned every individual statistic for careers, but he also had the individual season statistics that really stood out. But for me, Brian, Heinz Ward, Steelers great, franchise great. But the Steelers have had a lot of great wide receivers. I don't know that I place... Where do you place Heinz Ward in the top 5, right? Got to be top 5. Top 3? You think top 3?
He's 3.
Okay.
For me, Heinz Ward is 3.
Okay. He's number 3.
Yeah.
Okay, number 3. So I'm guessing Swan or Stallworth is up there.
Yep.
I would put Stallworth number 1.
So would I. That's exactly where I have John Stallworth is, in my mind, the greatest receiver in Steelers history, followed by Lynn Swan, and then Heinz Ward.
Okay. So is Antonio Brown in your top 5?
I don't know. I'm in denial that he ever played for us at this point. I certainly, you cannot question his ability and his talent and his skills. But there's so much more that goes into, being. It's not just a stat-based thing, in my mind anyway. For some people, maybe it is. For some people, all it is about is who had the most catches, who scored the most touchdowns. But for me, there's more to it than that. And I know we're going to get into all this. But so I don't know that I even have him in my top 5. Maybe 5. But there are guys I'd rather have on my team. Not necessarily because of their production value, but just because of what they bring to the team, as opposed to what they don't bring to the team.
Well, I guess that's going to be part of the metrics, too. I think I had 5 things here. I was talking about career and then individual stats, and those are 2 separate categories. Of course, as a teammate, off-field stuff, and then we have to talk about consideration when it comes to maybe being a Hall of Famer. We have to talk about league impact as well. Just individual with the Steelers, because obviously, we're talking about Steelers greats and they've had a lot of them, and you can't leave Lewis Lips out of this conversation. Santonio Holmes, maybe not the longevity, but definitely impact-wise in that conversation. I'm sure Plaxico Burress comes up in the conversation. Believe it or not, Yancey Thigpen even can be put into part of this conversation, and there's some other guys. Who am I trying to think of? Back when they wore the leather helmets, but you had some pre-merger, pre-NFL merger guys too that could probably be considered in some of that. What was it? It was Roy Jefferson that ended up going to the Chargers too, and still had
LB Nickel.
LB Nickel, that's who I'm thinking of.
Yeah, although I guess he's more maybe of a tight end.
Well, they called him ends back then.
Buddy Dial.
Yeah, Buddy Dial. There's a good one right there. Yeah, LB Nickel, what do you call it? It's an end. They didn't pass the ball as
Yeah.
much at sometimes, back in the day either, and you had the wishbone. So what do? Things evolve in the game. Run and shoot,
Yep.
RPO. There's just so many of these things that occur and change and get tweaked, and some things stay, some things go. So what else are you supposed to say? My uncle still calls them ends every now and then, a wide receiver that is, and it's like, okay, he's an end. But is he a tight end? Who knows? I don't know where you play some of them. But definitely, Heath Miller could even be in there when you're talking about guys that caught the ball. But technically, he plays tight end. So it's like, where do you place him with some of the overall team history and records and everything like that? So when you start to get into some of this stuff, it's the 2019 Steelers guide, which didn't change anything because Antonio Brown didn't play for the Steelers last season, nor did Hines Ward. And really no one else was moving up the charts here anyways. When you look at most touchdowns career-wise, Franco Harris tops overall with 100, and you have Heinz Ward with 86, Jerome Bettis with 80, and Antonio Brown ends up with 79. And we said Stallworth and Lynn Swann, and they got 64 and 53, but again, different era. These were the guys, and they're getting knocked around, man. I mean, and it's tough. This is why we're saying Ward versus Brown, mainly because Poni opened his big yapper. And, I think some of that is, believe it or not, Poni's usually with the hot take stuff, if you don't listen to the fan out in Pittsburgh Radio, he actually sided with Heinz Ward being, the guy, said all of these different metrics and everything else. And I think some of that is just because Antonio Brown is clowning. When you see him on social media, you think about some of the goofy things he did, but some of those things were fun. We liked those things back then. Maybe not throwing a Gatorade, whatever container on the field or on the sidelines, or, leaving a game and not showing up and whatever. Yeah. But you go to some of the other stuff, and of course, there's all the wacky stuff he did with the Raiders last offseason, painting a Steelers helmet silver and trying to get his preferred helmet. But he shows up in a hot air balloon there. But he did all kind of other stuff, like the Spider-Man goalpost thing where he hugged the goalpost wrap, and then flipping in the end zone. Or who could forget the finishing move where he kicked Spencer, whatever, the punter from the Browns. Where he just completely didn't even, it was like a hurdle, man, and he just curb stomped him on the field. There's plenty of good memories about Antonio Brown, too. It's almost like you almost forgot about the guy until he opened his mouth right now. So now you have there's plenty of material he gave us last year, obviously, but where do you consider that when you talk about statistics and stuff? You got to give him his due.
I'm gonna, because I saw this on Twitter. You may have seen it as well. It's a guy who's a big Steelers fan. He's a police officer in New Jersey, and I retweeted his tweet. So I'm basically going to read it and give him credit for it, because in my mind it sums up exactly how I feel about Antonio Brown. And it goes like this. He says, many may not like this, but I'm not hyping our former wide receiver. Hall of Famer or not, I'm not slobbing over this dude. As I've said a million times, as soon as he walked off that field at halftime in an important game with that mink coat, he became a nobody to me. And his name is Dane. Well, he goes, I don't know what his name is.
Oh, Dane. Sure, but
yeah, Dane. You are under arrest.
Mm-hmm.
So he's he seems like a really good guy. I've never met him in real life, but I've had some interactions with him on Twitter. He seems like a really good guy. And I know he's a big time fan, and I know he goes to a lot of games, and I happen to agree with him 100% on this. That's why there may be guys who have just no comparison at the stat or talent level of Antonio Brown that I'd rather have on a team. And the reason is, even if when you have hindsight, right? And the ability to look back, you understand that, I guess, even from the point of before he made it big, Antonio Brown was a selfish player, and he was about Antonio Brown. It was not about, the team. It was about me and getting my money and getting me my stats. And you can see it in hindsight. Yes, he was kind of more fun, right? at certain point in times in his career, it was the funny Antonio Brown, and you could let it go. And then I guess we can blame Vontaze Burfict if we want. Vontaze Burfict scrambled his brains, and the goofy. Yeah, the goofy point of Antonio Brown went right out the window, and the spoiled Veruca Salt brat version of Antonio Brown came out, and all of a sudden, he lost the childish playfulness with which many viewed him and just became a diva. It happens to a lot of receivers to begin with. Receivers tend to be divas, but you lay it off when they are team guys and when they are about doing whatever it takes to help the team. I just, if you're that guy, you don't do what he did. And I just can't, makes it difficult for me to get past that.
Well, we kind of got to the off field ahead of even the individual statistics. By the way, Dane, you may not have known this, Brian, one of the original supporters, probably one of the first people who followed the Steel City Underground account on Twitter. So I've had numerous interactions with Dane over the years, and if he's listening, hello, and say hello wherever you're at, Dane. We haven't heard from you in a while. So, but anyway, here's part of my thing is you can't take away, no matter what. This was, I think, the Terrell Owens thing with him getting a Hall of Fame, and we'll probably bring his name up again later. And you got a lot of boneheads, I guess is the best word for it, that have been out there over the years that have played wide receiver. Ocho Cinco is definitely another one that comes to mind for sure. Yep. But, as anyone, I don't know. I don't want to bring that up just yet. I don't think. I guess I'll bring it up. Terry Bradshaw hasn't had the best relationship with Steelers Nation over the years, or the organization or team.
No.
Yes, but you still can't take away from what he did. The difference is Terry Bradshaw has 4 rings, and Antonio Brown has.
It's a bigger difference than that. Bradshaw did what was required by the team, right? Bradshaw put team first, Bradshaw second.
Fair.
And what happened is, afterwards, when his playing career was done, then he became about Terry Bradshaw, the brand, and Steelers became secondary to him. And he used, in my mind, the Steelers and the organization to further Terry Bradshaw. But it was after he was no longer a Steeler. I know Steelers for life. I get it. Is once a Steeler, always a Steeler. But, that I get it. He had to now kind of separate himself, and he found ways to do it. Well, and there was way more involved in his issues with the Steelers, and especially with Chuck Noll, and some of the other players. But
there's stuff where Bradshaw now doesn't come back to the team and stuff like that. As much as you want to say, like with James Harrison having not exactly the best split as well, he's already been back, and he's said things both positive and negative about his time in Pittsburgh. So, I have a love-hate with that as well. And when all this AB stuff was coming out, I absolved myself initially from some of even the podcasts that we did, because I'm carrying the flag for the guy the whole way from the very beginning. I had his jersey before you could even buy it. And he got the contract. Mike Wallace didn't. And I was behind him the whole time. And then he took off, man. I mean, I even had him in my fantasy football leagues, and people didn't know who the heck he was. So you got some statistics here with Antonio Brown. Number 1, 9 seasons as a Steeler, as opposed to Heinz Ward's 14. And by the way, that's tied for 3rd. Ben is now going to head into 16 or maybe even more now, over Mike Webster, number 1 overall. Mike Webster had 15 seasons with the Steelers. Ben had 16 if you kind of count last year, I guess, and we'll be heading into 17. James Harrison and a bunch of others are tied here with 14, including Hines Ward, Donnie Shell, John Stallworth, Larry Brown, Mel Blount, Terry Bradshaw, Ernie Stautner. So I guess the thing is that AB played five fewer seasons with the team and still has some eye-popping statistics. He has 15 touchdowns, which ranks for an individual season in 2018, which ranks 2nd all time. And, for the franchise behind Willie Parker, who had 16 back in 2006. And that's the year that's the thing that I don't get, man. He had that huge game against New Orleans, and they lost, and then all of a sudden it was like Juju was the MVP, and everything just went downhill, and maybe it was just the kettle on the stove that was ready to boil over. Nobody was paying attention to it. It was starting to whistle, and they kept shoving things under the rug. I don't know, man. I still don't know where to go with some of that, but second, so for most touchdowns in a season, he's second, and also that's tied with Lewis Lips, 15. He's also fourth, because there is no third here. So he also has the fourth most with 14 in 2014. And then there's no fifth. There's sixth, because he's, ninth, where he's tied with 12 with a number of folks as well. And he has, I don't even know how many games with multiple touchdowns. And you can start digging into some of this stuff too, with receiving and yards from scrimmage and being a kick returner. I'm not exactly sure where the turning point is when you get into his off-field stuff, but when you look at individual statistics, when you look at career statistics, yeah, Heinz Ward has some stuff. He's the all-time career leader for the organization with 1,000 receptions. That magic number that he finally got right at the tail end of his final season, the last reception that he had, that puts him into a category that not many others, even in the league, have done. I know he's not a Marvin Harrison or a Jerry Rice, but at least, that extra digit, not 999, 1,000, puts him into a whole different category when you're talking about greats. But Antonio Brown, 5 fewer seasons, 837, and there's no reason to believe that maybe if he did play last year and played for the Steelers, maybe he doesn't get that much closer based on having Mason Rudolph and Duck Hodges. It's interesting to think about, though. If he was there, would that have taken the pressure off of guys like Juju? We don't know. Michael Vick couldn't complete a pass to the guy who was considered the GOAT at the time, and Landry Jones could. So, I don't know. And then we talk about Heath Miller. Heath Miller's here at third with 592, and then John Stallworth with 537. So that's kind of interesting. Antonio Brown holds practically all of the top 10 spots. This is an interesting little list to put together here, Brian, too, when you're talking about receptions in a season. Brown has the number 1 and number 2 seasons. Heinz Ward has number 3. Juju has number 4. Then Brown has 5, 6, 7, and 8. Heinz Ward tied himself twice with 95 receptions at number 9 and also has the 11th. So it really is Heinz Ward versus Antonio Brown when you're looking at some of these categories. When you get into individual games, AB just he takes off here. The most Heinz had was like 13 in a game. You have Antonio Brown, who had 14 twice, 16, 17. The guy just has some amazing seasons, too. He has the top 4 receiving yards seasons. Heinz Ward is there at 8th. But, again, both these guys smiled. They looked like they were happy when they were playing the game. And, are we holding too much against Antonio Brown for the way he left from Pittsburgh and some of the antics that are going on right now? Do you think some of that might subside in the future, and then you look at this and say, well, he was one of the greatest wide receivers in Pittsburgh Steelers history? I don't know.
There's a caveat that goes along with it. Does he shut up? Look, if Antonio Brown quietly fades into the background and is no longer feeling like he needs to be the focus of attention, doesn't get into further trouble. We don't find out that the lawsuits against him have some validity. We don't find out a lot of other things. If he just goes away for a while, time heals most wounds. And then, yes, I think what happens is people will start to remember the good and forget how it ended, rather than not. But, it's a different world with this particular instance because nobody else ended like this. Nobody else walked out of a game, demanded a trade, got a trade, walked out on the team they got traded to, went to the worst possible team you could go to, in our opinion.
The New England Patriots, just in case anyone didn't make that link.
And then has just been nothing but a nightmare of problems since. So I don't know. You're just talking about a lot of drama that has occurred with Antonio Brown. And whether people can get past that or not. Look, You brought up T.O., and I don't know whether it's time to jump into this or not, because I do want to talk about the numbers as well, especially when you start talking about Swan and Stallworth.
Yeah, let's stay with the numbers real quick. I had the 100-yard receiving games, too. Brown had 42 and Ward had 29. Basically, Ward was the guy who was breaking, Stallworth's here at third with 25. Ward was breaking some of these numbers that Swan and Stallworth put up. And then AB came along and just kicked the door down.
You got to remember this. When Heinz Ward was the go-to receiver for this team,
wasn't always bad.
Who else was on this team that took a lot of play and took a lot of ball, and they didn't throw the ball the same amount? You had Bettis. You had Willie Parker. You had guys, they were a running team when Heinz Ward was on this team for the majority of it. And yet he put up those kind of numbers. With the number of seasons he had, with the number of seasons that this team focused more on the run than they did on the pass, Heinz Ward still put up those numbers.
Yeah, and I mean, 98 to 2011, and there's overlap with Antonio Brown joining. There's 2 seasons where they played together, but yeah, obviously Ward wasn't always playing with Big Ben. He had, the Tommy Gunn, or who else? Cordell. Kent Graham. Yep. We love bringing up Kent Graham, don't we? It's a name we've unearthed that I can't get. I can't get it out of my brain now. And Plaxico Burress, Santonio Holmes, but Antonio Brown had to compete for receptions too with Manny Sanders, with Mike Wallace, that whole Young Money crew. You had Heath Miller for both of those guys. Careers somewhere in there. So there were definitely people eating up targets, but you make a good point that Roethlisberger wasn't exactly the gunslinger we think of him as now, back when he first started, when he first came into the league in those first few years. And we always talk about this, how the 05 team was, and the 08 team were definitely propped up with defense. Now, Ben definitely really grew into being a grown-ass man when you get to that 2008 Super Bowl victory. But the first one was the bus's last ride, man. And, it was Willie Parker and Jerome Bettis and still defense. And Ward still did some of the things that he did. And Ward gave us plenty of billboard and highlight material too, knocking people out, and he always had that smile too. When you think of Antonio Brown smiling right now, you don't get the same kind of warm and fuzzies. You know what I mean? You look at him and you're like, I wonder what's going on up there. You see the gears turning and stuff in his head. So it's just, to me, when you look at this on paper, statistically, let's do this. Individually, if you go individual seasons, Antonio Brown by far had better individual seasons than Heinz Ward did, statistically. Career-wise, I'm not sure who put together the better career, because Ward still had 85 career touchdowns, receiving touchdowns, which is tops. Yep. That's still more than AB at 74. Stallworth and Swan are right behind it. So you can't necessarily say that Antonio Brown holds everything, even with the 5 fewer seasons, had a better career with the Steelers, because it was a shorter career, and he didn't necessarily steal every single statistic that Ward either held or still holds over like a Swan and Stallworth. So career-wise, I start to lean towards, the pendulum goes the other way, I start to lean towards Heinz Ward as having the better statistical career. That 1,000 receptions, that does it for me. I don't care that AB, if he would have stuck around, it's one of those things. It's like coulda, woulda, shoulda. He didn't. So he doesn't have those numbers, and I can't give him the overall career as far as statistics. So now I got 1 and 1 in the columns for me.
All right, I'm going to look at a different number, and that's targets.
Okay.
And I'm going to look at that, and I'm going to tell you that in the duration of Heinz Ward's career, he had never had more than 160 targets in a season. Antonio Brown, in his short span, beat that 5 times.
Yeah.
So 5 out of his 8 seasons, he had more targets per year than Heinz Ward ever got in a single season. And that makes a difference. Again, it's the focus. And while you're right, he had Manny Sanders to compete with. That competition wasn't long, nor was it long with Mike Wallace, because Mike Wallace was gone pretty quickly. They kind of had that 1 year or 2 years where they were all together, and then it was Antonio Brown, right? And you think about that, it became the Antonio Brown and Ben Roethlisberger show. Now, had he been able to maintain this, had he been able to stay a focused guy who had the right mentality to have the kind of career duration that a Heinz Ward had, that a John Stallworth had, I don't think there's any question that numerically Antonio Brown would own every single Steelers receiving record that exists. But he couldn't. And whether he couldn't because, Vontaze Burfict scrambled his brains, or whether he couldn't because somewhere deep down in his makeup, he's just a selfish brat, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Because, and let me be clear, I'm not saying that Antonio Brown is a horrible, selfish human being. I don't know Antonio Brown. I know that the way he's acted over the past year certainly makes me question a lot of things. But I try not to judge anybody that I don't know. I haven't walked in his shoes. But when you look at his actions, you have to question certain things. So I just don't know. I don't know what the makeup of the guy is. But it looks to me from the outside looking in that, as I said earlier on, Antonio Brown was much more of an Antonio Brown guy than he was a Steelers guy. Heinz Ward was nothing if not a team guy. He sacrificed, all kinds of different roles that he did just the same way. I mean, Antonio Brown did a little bit of it by returning punts when called upon and when needed and things of that nature. But Heinz Ward, just to ask Rivers from Cincinnati. Like I said, we've talked about this before. There's no more feared, receiver in the league than Heinz Ward. And not necessarily just because he was going to catch the ball and laugh at you as he scored, but because he was going to knock you the heck out. Again, he's a guy that had a rule named after him.
Yeah, well, that's something that I was going to bring up in a little bit. I'm just looking again, overall career numbers, and I like some of the stuff that you brought up. There was 283 targets that separate AB from Heinz Ward. Heinz Ward, of course, has more with the longevity and having played in 217 games to Antonio Brown's 130. You have the 1,000 receptions to Antonio Brown's 837. And mind you, I'm only counting the Steelers statistics. I'm not counting the one game in New England he played last year.
4 New England catches.
That was amazing. ESPN, you want to talk about being on somebody's jock. Were they ever on anyone's jock as much as Antonio Brown playing that game with the Patriots?
My God.
Disgusting.
Terrible.
So they're definitely Steelers haters. But 163 receptions separate them. You got 12,083 yards for Heinz Ward versus 11,207. And I didn't do my maths here because I was busy yapping. So that is 876 yards that separates them. 12.1 yards of reception versus 13.4. So, nickel diamond here, maybe a yard extra. But you got 74 touchdowns again for Antonio Brown to Heinz Ward's 85. And I always bring this one up too, Brian, as being a much more avid Madden video game player back in the PlayStation 2 era. If there was anybody you wanted to throw the ball to in that game to make sure you got a first down conversion, it was Heinz Ward. Heinz Ward has 620 catches for first down conversions to Antonio Brown's 548. That's mind-blowing right there. And I know some of it's longevity. There's no doubt in my mind Antonio Brown plays. I don't think he would have played an extra 5 seasons or whatever. Made it up to Heinz Ward's ripe age of 35, his final season, 36 when he retired. We always talk about guys falling off at 31. That's what Antonio Brown was last year. So I know he took care of his body. I know he worked out real hard. He was, what do you want to say? I don't want to say genetic freak because he's still a smaller guy, but he was still a guy that was you talk about James Harrison working out. Antonio Brown worked out very hard. This isn't a guy that was just sitting on the couch eating, potato chips or something. This is a guy that was doing extra jugs drills and stuff and everything that it took to be as good as Antonio Brown could be. But that's what you said. It's the individual. Maybe he was more interested in just the individual. I mean, he backfired on Ben. backfired on so many other people, leaves a bad taste in your mouth. So, as a teammate, aside, and we could probably throw the off-field in here too as our categories. As a teammate, there's no doubt that, like what you just said, Heinz Ward, definitely the better teammate, by far. And he'd go out there and sacrifice his body too. That's a pretty big thing. I can't think of Antonio Brown. He did it. It wasn't like he was a reluctant blocker, but it wasn't something that sticks in your mind that you see somebody blow by or lay a block like Heinz Ward did. You also don't have Facebook Live incidents and things of that nature. I know some people will probably bring up, showing up in a Rolls Royce. This is the thing that was always like problematic for me. You always had the smoke. Usually where there's smoke, there's fire. You'd have a guy like Jeremy Fowler come out and say, Antonio Brown has new contract demands right at the start of training camp, and show up in like a black and gold Rolls Royce or something like that. And you would never hear Antonio Brown say that. You would hear Le'Veon Bell say it. He'd make a rap song about it. Never heard AB say anything about it. So that doesn't necessarily make him a bad person. James Harrison showed up on a fire truck. That doesn't make James Harrison a bad person. You had other guys that show up and do all kinds of things. Vince Williams with the, Stone Cold Steve Austin get up the 1 year. And those things are fun. I don't hold that against players whatsoever, because then the rest of training camp is kind of, pure hell. And you were in the middle of nowhere. Now, it'll be interesting to see what ends up happening this year as guys start to report and things like that. But, Antonio Brown, he went off on, Ed Bouchette about some medical stuff, the one training camp. Yep. Supposedly, we find out he had like his own everything that was catered to him out there. That's not necessarily being a teammate. Teammate means being equal. Now, I understand if some veterans may not share a room with a rookie. They might get their own lodging. They may have their own, bed. There's not like 2 twin beds or whatever these guys get at St. Vincent College in the same room. He may have like his room with his own queen bed or something like that, right? But Antonio Brown was like, it pretty much seemed like this was the guy that would demand his own dressing room. You know what I mean? Surprised he didn't have his own locker room in Heinz Field. These aren't the kind of stories you got to tie in with Heinz Ward. Now, off the field stuff, Heinz Ward got tagged with a DUI once. So when you talk about AB flying up McKnight Road or whatever, doing 130 or whatever he was doing with the sports car, whatever the governor lets you do, that would be not Governor Wolf, but the governor in the car, unless he had it modified, which he could have. Who knows? I don't remember exactly what it was. But then you get the stuff where he's throwing furniture off the apartment balcony and things like that. To me, you got to go with Ward as a teammate and for the off-field stuff. So now I got it 3-1. I got it 3-1 for Heinz Ward.
Yeah, all you got to do is look at the last year and then start to listen to the rumor mill to a certain extent. You know that for years I've gone to signings and I have stood in line, met guys, met players, done things. And when I do that, I talk to a lot of Steelers fans and a lot of Steelers fans who have gone to training camps, gone to the facilities out in the whatever part of Pittsburgh it's in. I can't remember now.
South side.
The South Side, yes. And guys who hear a lot of things. And it had, even when Antonio Brown was a fan favorite and everybody loved him, people would talk about Antonio Brown and say he ain't the nice guy you think he is. So I don't know, but it came back to my mind when all of this started happening. Look, I've never heard a bad word about Heinz Ward in the sense of, rumor mill, in the sense of the media, in the sense of anybody. I have never heard it. It doesn't mean Heinz Ward is perfect. I'm sure he's not. Look, just like the rest of us, I'm sure he's a bleep hole at times, and it doesn't, it just is the way it is. But you kind of disregard some of those things. Yeah, there's no question Heinz Ward, from the standpoint of a teammate, from the standpoint of the off-field stuff, you have to give the nod to him. Now, does that mean, I guess because our comparison is Antonio Brown, Heinz Ward, yeah, that goes there. Because you also have guys like John Stallworth, you have guys like Lynn Swann, who also have their own history with things, and Stallworth's off-the-field stuff that he's done and the way he has been successful in doing a lot of things and becoming a part owner of the team and all of those things, I would say that he still gets a nod there. But I don't want to talk about John Stallworth. I already told you he's the number one guy.
Well, you may have to justify it to some of the listeners.
Well, I'm going to justify it like this. Here you go. You wanted to talk about the other thing with I brought up the other thing with targets. Wait a minute. Let me get this. Let me throw this out there just for folks who want to understand. John Stallworth played with Terry Bradshaw, right? We all agree that's true. And Terry Bradshaw and Mark Malone. But Terry Bradshaw only threw the ball over 400 times in a season twice. Okay? Ben Roethlisberger has done it almost every year he's been.
Yes.
There's a difference in the game. Franco Harris and Rocky Bleier ate up 99% of the snaps in those games. It just was a different era. And yet John Stallworth was a dynamic receiver. And when the rules changed with Mel Blount, who did they have take over? Stallworth and Swan. It's different eras, and they had less opportunities. But I would say if he played with in an era where they were throwing the ball around like that, we wouldn't even be having these conversations because it wouldn't be close. It would be John Stallworth.
Yeah, I can't disagree. And I was joking with Mark Malone, but he put up stats even without Bradshaw. So you can't just say it was all driven by Terry necessarily. TB12. I lost my train of thought there for a second, Brian. Oh, I was going to say we were. I wonder if some of that. You're talking about AB's not the guy that you think he is, or if anyone ever had like the gut feeling that he was like a diva receiver before necessarily that stuff became more of a public display than it is now. I wonder if some of that's just the guilt by association. Now, hold on here. Guilt by association of previous guys like a Plaxico Burress. He left the team. Then he went and shot himself in the foot or leg or whatever he did in New York. Santonio Holmes, the whole thing that went down there and how he left the team. And, you talk about somebody who's mended fences. There's a guy who's mended fences for sure. Actually, I had this conversation out at the beach with that one gentleman too, and we were talking about that. So, it's without the realm of plausibility that Antonio Brown can repair his reputation as long as he doesn't just keep digging the hole deeper. So,
yes. There's no question that he can do that if he learns to. I'll tell you what would go a long way. Here's what would go a long way. Take responsibility.
Yeah. Everything is someone else's fault.
Take responsibility and culpability, and don't do it and go, yeah, I did bad things, and then 10 minutes later come back and go, but it was everybody else's fault.
And then go do something worse.
Yeah. Take responsibility for your actions, make amends the way you need to make amends, and I think a lot of things can be forgiven because there is no question that we're all going to remember the Immaculate Extension for the rest of our lives, those of us who saw it, right? We're going to remember the helmet catches. We're going to remember all of the great moments that he had. But yes, as I guess it would be Joey from Friends that goes, but it's tainted. It's tainted by your betrayal.
Well, it is Joey that is speaking. In theory, Joey. The character Joey. Anyway, I was saying the kind of guilt by the association too. The Young Money crew with Mike Wallace and the way all that went down, and Emmanuel Sanders, and even when Emmanuel Sanders he leaves. He did sign, or the Steelers matched that restricted offer, so he plays one more season here, and then he goes to leave, and he was going to sign with, maybe it was San Francisco, maybe, and then he pulled the rug from under them and did a 180 and ended up in Denver, like he was, using one deal to leverage another contract, and then all of a sudden he was playing with Peyton Manning and talking about how great Peyton Manning was as opposed to Ben Roethlisberger as a quarterback, which didn't sit well with a lot of people. And I wonder if you would transpose some of these things that happened onto AB maybe unfairly, you know what I mean? It's extra baggage maybe he shouldn't have had. Well, just bear with me here. The counterpoint to this is that Heinz Ward was here during all those guys' names that I said and does not have a single bad thing that anybody said about him like you just said. So does he just keep his nose out of trouble? Is there smoke where there's fire and all those things? Quite frankly, so I think so. It's real easy, like I said, to say teammate, off field, all this other stuff. Now, we had mentioned Terrell Owens, and those were the kind of things that were maybe keeping him out from having his, bronze mug put over there in Canton, Ohio, immortalized as part of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And this was part of the conversation that was going back and forth, even with some of the beat writers and Fillipponi. Where do you place Heinz Ward, who's had an awful long time here to get on these ballots? He's been maybe a semifinalist. There's just so many darn people that are coming in the pipeline after him here that have some tremendous numbers. The guys that he's up against, I don't know that he's ever going to be. There is one thing, like you said, they named a rule after him. Where do you put Heinz Ward as far as is he a Hall of Famer? Great Pittsburgh Steelers player. Great. Steelers great, no doubt, right? 1,000 receptions, 12,000 yards, 2-time Super Bowl champion, Super Bowl MVP. Never a first-team All-Pro, though. Second-team All-Pro 3 times. 4-time Pro Bowler. Steelers all-time team. Guy didn't play with like a ligament in his knee.
Yeah.
And he was a quarterback.
Yeah.
And he did all this. So, I don't know. Like, the Hall of Fame voters, is this a Donnie Shell type of thing?
This is what I'm going to start. First off, I'm going to say this. Terrell Owens doesn't deserve to be in the Hall of Fame.
That is not a hot take to me.
It's not even a remote hot take. He got in because of his stats. And stats-wise, I will agree. The stats say this is that caliber of player. But Hall of Fame is more than stats in my mind. And maybe I'm old-fashioned, Joe, a guy who looks, harkens back to days of old when he thinks of these things. But I don't know why I went Southern to do that. But
I took it as West Virginian, which will still offend quite a few of our listeners.
Yeah, I really wasn't trying to be West Virginian, but
Kentucky. There you go.
It's like Kentucky. It's like an old time Kentucky guy hanging out on his plantation or something, and drinking gin. That's a bad image too. Never mind. I'm screwing it all up.
You're digging the hole just like AB.
I am. I am. But it was, in my mind, you get in the Hall of Fame not just because of your numbers, but because of how you represented yourself as a teammate, how you represented yourself in the league, and you're a Hall of Fame caliber individual, right? It's not you had Hall of Fame stats. It's you are a Hall of Fame caliber individual. Let me equate this to baseball real quick. Pete Rose. I'm the biggest Pete Rose fan in the entire universe. Doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame. It's a hit king. Doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame. Why? Because he screwed the hell up.
Well, he did. There's others, though, like baseball. Well, let's not get into baseball. There's a lot of goofy things with baseball.
But that's my point. My point is I'm not picking on Terrell Owens, right?
Yeah.
Pete Rose is probably my favorite baseball player of all time. I used to want to be Pete Rose, right? Charlie Hustle, the whole thing. But if you ask me now, does he deserve Hall of Fame? I'll go no. I'll say no. Did Terrell Owens deserve to be in a Hall of Fame? Absolutely not. He got in, but I don't think he deserves to be in. Same thing with Antonio Brown. He's at this point even fringe on his numbers. Yes, he's got a lot of records, but when you look at his overall career and length of career, it's fringe. And what makes it fringe to me is the touchdowns. His touchdowns per reception is low. It's been low. It was a low a lot of time. He used to make a lot of catches, but he didn't always make, pay dirt. But people are going to scream and holler that he needs to go in. And I'm going to tell you that what he did at the end of his career absolutely exempts him from being in the Hall of Fame. Period. End of story. Now, Heinz Ward. Heinz Ward is the most ferocious blocking wide receiver in the history of the game. On that alone, in my mind, he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. When you couple that with being a Super Bowl MVP, with having the 1,000 receptions, with having the number of touchdowns per target that he has, with playing on teams that were run-focused and still putting up numbers, the longevity enters into it. Heinz Ward's a Hall of Famer in my view. Yes, is he a, on the edge kind of a Hall of Famer? Yes, but to me it tilts towards it. right? It tilts towards he deserves to go in. And we all know there are certain positions that simply don't get the love by the Hall of Fame, and wide receiver just happens to be one of them. And especially with the way numbers come around in the league nowadays, where, it's a passing league and people are just doing these ridiculous things, it's harder. It's much harder. But if you look at Heinz Ward's career, I believe he deserves to be in. And which beat writer is a big champion for this? It's Ed. It's Bouchette, isn't it?
No, I honestly think he's more cynical about it. It might be Caballi.
Well, I don't think he thinks he'll get in, but I think he thinks he deserves to get in,
which is fair.
Yeah, and I've said the same thing too. I don't know that he'll ever get in. Donnie Shell, that's been a travesty. Bill Nunn is a huge travesty. Those were ridiculous, right? Because it was so clear that Donnie Shell deserved to be in the Hall of Fame for years, and it's been so clear that Bill Nunn deserves to be in the Hall of Fame for years. And the fact that one of them got in is great. That the other one hasn't gotten in yet is still absurd. Those don't even Heinz Ward doesn't compare to that, right? It won't be that kind of a miscarriage of justice if Heinz Ward never gets into the Hall of Fame, but he should get in.
Okay. I've got some supporting evidence for this, by the way. And I'm not saying that Heinz wouldn't be a Hall of Famer. It's very difficult. There are names in here that are in above and below Heinz Ward, what he did statistically. You made a lot of cases for everything else that encompasses what a gold jacket should be, of which Antonio Brown is not necessarily at this time. You take a look at the leaders, NFL receiving yards, career leaders. Jerry Rice, above all. He's got like almost 6,000 more yards than Larry Fitzgerald right now. That's just unbelievable. Now, Larry Fitzgerald's number 2. Larry Fitzgerald is not retired yet. Larry Fitzgerald will be in the pipeline to where, Heinz Ward can't even get it to be a finalist. He still can't get Alan Faneca in there either. And Alan Faneca is beyond deserving, and even more than like Kevin Mawai and a few other guys that have gone in already.
Yep.
T.O. was 3rd. So you say the stats. Randy Moss is 4th. Isaac Bruce is in there, 5th. Tony Gonzalez is a tight end. Tim Brown, Steve Smith. Steve Smith's going to be eligible here shortly. And definitely is going to be one of those guys you think of. And also because, hey, he was with the Panthers. I mean, the Panthers were still like a team that, kind of, and not necessarily, he wasn't there when they were necessarily an expansion team, but he's kind of one of the faces of that franchise, being a newer franchise in the NFL, right? So I think for sure that he's somebody that comes up. Marvin Harrison in the Hall of Fame. Reggie Wayne. Here's a guy, Chris Collinsworth. Andre Johnson. Okay, James Lofton's in. Chris Carter's in. Anquan Bolden, more recently retired, will be eligible shortly. Henry Ellard's not in. Torrey Holt is not in. Torrey Holt most favorably compares here with Heinz Ward. When you look at some of the statistics, you're talking about 13,382 receiving yards, 920 receptions, 74 touchdowns. So Heinz Ward ends up falling in this list as we continue going. Andre Reed, Steve Largent, they're Hall of Famers. Art Monk. You still have like guys like Brandon Marshall, Jimmy Smith, who aren't in. Julio Jones is 25th, like 40-some yards here more than what Heinz Ward has as 26th all-time NFL leader in receiving yards. Heinz Ward is 14th in receptions. He falls behind guys like Jerry Rice, Larry Fitzgerald, Tony Gonzalez, Jason Witten, believe it or not, Marvin Harrison, Chris Carter, Tim Brown, Terrell Owens, Anquan Bolden, Reggie Wayne, Andre Johnson, Steve Smith. These are a lot of guys that have played post Heinz Ward. So that means he was higher on this list at one point, right? That's got to be taken into consideration. And then Isaac Bruce. Randy Moss wasn't even a 1,000 reception guy. 982, short, right? Then Brandon Marshall, Antonio Gates, Andre Reed, who is in the Hall of Fame. Let's see, we've got some more Hall of Famers here, like Art Monk, who's like 20th overall. Heinz Ward, 14th on this list, mind you. So Antonio Brown falls in at 28th in receptions and 35th in receiving yards. And the kind of category Antonio Brown is in statistically, okay, you got Megatron in here at 31. He retired early. But you got guys like Musha Muhammad, Rod Smith, Keenan McCardle, Ocho Cinco, Joey Galloway. These aren't guys, Keyshawn Johnson. These are not guys that I consider to be Hall of Fame type guys. And you still got other guys, and they're still in the same kind of category too. Wes Welker with receptions, Jimmy Smith, Musha Muhammad, Irving Fryer. Heinz Ward's above these guys. There's there's tiers here. Heinz Ward is in a tier where his peers are already in the Hall of Fame. Antonio Brown is not. And I think that makes it clear as to where the needle points as far as who is a potential future Hall of Famer. I just think personally the problem with Heinz Ward is like what you just said. Great Pittsburgh Steeler. Where do you put him at in the total NFL thing? If they're going to put one wide receiver in every year, that's the reason. I'm not saying he would never make it. That's the reason why I feel he wouldn't. It would just be because of all of these other guys who keep coming in. They retire. You're going to pick one. Okay, we're going to do Steve Smith this year. Okay, now it's time for Larry Fitzgerald to get his gold jacket. Reggie Wayne. These are guys that are going to be holding up here. Anquan Bolden, I don't know, maybe. He's had an interesting career too. It's just going to be very interesting to see where it all plays out, how it pans out. Maybe they do 2 wide receivers one year. They have a shortage of something else. He lucks out. It's just going to be very difficult. And then you got all these, young bucks that are going to be coming in here too and stealing the thunder over the years. Like Odell Beckham.
Yeah,
that's a joke.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I see that one coming any day now. Let me put it this way: would you think that the top 3 stats for a receiver are receiving yards, receptions, and touchdowns?
It got to be. What else can you have?
All right. By that count, Heinz Ward only misses the top 25 in receiving yards. And like you just mentioned,
and
he's
just
26.
Narrowly, yeah.
Narrowly, very narrowly. To me, that says that's a Hall of Fame guy, right? He's top 25 all time. Are there more than 25 receivers in the Hall of Fame? Yes, there are. He's top 25 all time, belongs in the Hall of Fame. But again, he's at that level where, if he doesn't get in, nobody's gonna look at it. And I don't think people are gonna lobby for him the way they have done for Donnie Shell these many years. I don't think, there was I think it was Ed Bouchette there's an article that says Bill Nunn's starting to get some traction. Long overdue. People should have been losing their minds about Bill Nunn not being in the Hall of Fame.
Absolutely.
But I just don't see that kind of passion being maintained for a Heinz Ward candidacy to the Hall of Fame if time goes by, which is why I kind of believed if he didn't get in early, I'm not sure that the committee is gonna put him in. Maybe when we get to 200 seasons and none of us are around, they'll come back and go, okay, we have to add 200 more people because it's 200 seasons. Let's add Heinz Ward. And no one will care because they'll be like, who?
Well, wasn't this a lot of the same knocks on Jerome Bettis getting in? I mean, it really was in the running back category, right? Yeah. I mean, he's in there statistically. When he retired, among the tops, rushing yards, touchdowns, and obviously he was somebody that you could picture playing, running people over. I could picture that with Heinz Ward. So it's gonna be very interesting to see, where his legacy ends up. It's tough, and with the running backs, maybe it also helps that you have more by committee type stuff now. That maybe there weren't as many guys that were becoming eligible to be in the Hall of Fame where Bettis was able to get in there when he did. So, I mean, that's something that I've considered when I think about Heinz Ward. The other problem is like how many wide receivers do you have to play on the field at the same time in this pass-happy league that you have right now? It's just like you said, he didn't get in there within these first 5 years or whatever of being eligible. And it seemed like even last year, I'm not even sure, was he a semifinalist for this last class? I don't believe he was. I mean, he's definitely
He might have been. I can't remember. He was on the ballot. I don't remember how far he got.
Yeah, the ballot or the consideration list. He's there. I don't know. There's going to be somebody that's going to be like, well, Antonio Brown did this and that. I guarantee you. And it's not to say he didn't do a lot of great things. I don't know. The one I struggle with that's also in there, Brian, is Terrell Davis, by the same token. Short career.
Well, I never have believed Terrell Davis should have been in the Hall of Fame. simply because of longevity. Look, he was dominant when he was there, but he wasn't there that much.
But what you're going to have,
and he had John Elway.
But you also got some others. You're going to have people that are going to be, they're going to be all for Gronk when that time comes around too. Dominant player, short career, Megatron.
Don't make me vomit and say this because I think that Gronk probably deserves it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think Megatron does.
There was no more dominant receiver than Calvin Johnson. It's just ridiculous. I absolutely believe he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. Despite this is a guy that he was so dominant despite the short career, and he left on his own terms. The same way Barry Sanders did. Nobody's going to argue that Barry Sanders could have played longer, and nobody's going to argue Barry Sanders is a Hall of Famer because he absolutely was.
Yeah,
Calvin Johnson's kind of the same way. I'm not putting Gronk in the Calvin Johnson conversation, but he was annoying.
I say that because of Terrell Davis too, or you get somebody with a short career that's in there.
Let's put it this way: let's say he plays 2 more years down there in Tampa and stinks.
Yeah, that could
tarnishes the legacy.
It could. I mean, you get a lot of guys who leave. I mean, Franco left. Played for the Seahawks. Yeah. And, you get things like that and they're forgotten. So, that type of thing could be forgotten too. I think there's the love for Gronk. And I think, he was dominant for what he was when he was, even if it would be short period. Maybe the numbers aren't quite up there and whatnot. Calvin Johnson for sure, man. I mean, or definitely slam dunk. It's just interesting to say because, we drive a lot of this with statistics. So would people make the same argument for Antonio Brown? 9 seasons? I don't think he's in there.
Try. There's
Calvin
no question.
Johnson.
People will try, and down the road, look, the same way that Terrell Owens got in is how Antonio Brown could conceivably get in. He will feel disrespected by the time he actually gets in because people are going to bad talk him, and bring up all this craziness that occurred at the end of his career repeatedly, and he's going to feel slighted and it's likely to bring it all out again as old man Antonio Brown starts to get harped on. So I don't know. He doesn't deserve to be in my view, but had things gone differently, certainly he was headed down that path. But the way things ended and where he's at, I just don't see it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's where I leave it. So we have Ward as a potential Hall of Famer. Antonio Brown is not. I don't even think you had AB winning one of your categories. I had one for individual seasons.
Let me put it this way. At least right now, he's dead to me.
Oh, it's fair enough, man. I like I said, it's still tough for me because it's really hard for me to just do a total 180 and despise such a guy that I loved for so many years. And I have that personal anecdotal type of experience that I saw at the kindness of his heart. So it makes it very difficult, makes it very tough. Still doesn't mean he's a Hall of Famer. Still doesn't mean he's better than Heinz Ward. And that's where we leave it. We're going to slam the gavel on it. So cumulatively, we had it 9-1 Heinz Ward. the better wide receiver, the better Pittsburgh Steeler, and perhaps the better NFL player overall too. If he should get immortalized in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Brian, you're always immortalized to me, my friend. I'll never forget you.
I'll never forget you either. This is so wonderful.
It is, but we've been up against it. It is time to say goodbye to our loyal listeners. Thank you for some of the kind words some of you had said, and hope you liked some of our alternate programming. Unfortunately, for those of you who did listen to the last show with Mike Pelaya, he got it to me like late, and then we were on vacation, and we just couldn't get. And I promised him I'd put it up, and he was talking about Cam Newton coming to the Steelers, and that just didn't age very well. So if it seemed a little out of place, sorry about that, folks. It's one of those things that just happened because we were busy. We're busy having fun.
Yeah,
but we like Mike to give his alternate opinions every now and then, but that's not when
Mike's
we're really
on board
with it.
Mike is a good guy. I don't agree with that take. Never would have, never will. But Mike's a good guy. I like Mike.
So just putting that out there for some programming notes for everyone, and for the foreseeable future, hopefully myself and Brian are able to get you more stuff. Hopefully we have a season, because then I don't know what we're going to do. Where do we go with the podcast? I mean, we stretch for some of this stuff, so thank you once again also to Antonio Brown for giving us more material. He has definitely been very generous in doing that for this show the last few years. So we have to give a shout out to him, of course.
Yes, he has. There's no question.
And my shout out to Brian. Thanks for joining me once again today.
Thank you, sir. Always a pleasure to spend some time talking Steelers football with you.
Absolutely. And I got it in for you. So didn't forget, we're putting a bow on it. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. My name is Joe. His name's Brian. Until next time, we encourage everyone out there to be safe, be good, and we'll catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.